NVIDIA bulls keep buying every dip hand over fist, even after earnings last week. Apple call sweepers are back after they made an insane 100% trade a couple weeks ago, and a super unusual trade that we haven't seen since the bear market of 2022. All that and much more in today's video. Make sure to subscribe, like the video below. Let's get started. So as you can see from the heat map here, a bit of a tech sell-off on Friday, which is interesting because if you look over here, the timing is uncanny here because retail investors are finally starting to take some chips off the table. After weeks of steady buying, the tide has actually just turned. For example, last week, individual investors sold about $900 million worth of stocks. That is the first weekly sale in 8 weeks and only the third time in the last 37 weeks they've sold at all. So that's according to Bank of America's data. And at the same time, by the way, hedge funds dumped $2 billion worth, which is their second straight week of selling. So a lot of profit taking thus far. Also something that's super interesting. Last week, not sure if you guys noticed, but a judge ruled that tariffs are illegal. And then Trump came back with this after the market closed on Friday. He said all tariffs are still in effect. So there's a little bit of a squabble between the existing administration and the courts. Also, another interesting thing over here, buybacks are back as well. So U.S. companies have announced over $1 trillion worth of buybacks year to date, which is the fastest pace to reach that threshold ever. So in July, announced share repurchases actually totaled $166 billion. So a lot of buying across the board behind the scenes. It seems like in the short term, this is a little bit of a zone for profit taking, specifically with retail than some of those hedge funds. But behind the scenes, both institutions as well as these companies with buybacks are at least buying now or planning to buy in the future. So a lot of interesting data from this week. Let's check out some other stuff. For example, some of the flow. Apple actually received a lot of unusual flow relative to what we've seen in previous weeks. And I'm going to go over this quickly, but remember, I'm still going to go over that super unusual print that we saw on Friday that we haven't seen since 2022. So make sure to stick around for that. As you can see here, Apple $1 million about at the money call for September 19th. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. $3.1 million. Both of these were sweep orders highlighted here in gold. So a lot of premium going to these 230 strike. And as you can see, as you scroll up, another 230 strike here just for the October, and then a 235 one all around the same day, same 24-hour time period at least. 1 million here and then a 1.9 million. So a lot of bullish activity again on Apple. If you guys remember from last time, Apple actually saw a huge pump after we saw similar orders to these. So I'll bring you to the chart to show you that. There were a bunch of orders during this dip over here at the beginning of August, end of July. And then we had this nice multi-day rally to the upside and those printed afterwards. But since then, it's actually been in consolidation mode for most of August. So as of now, it looks like it's in a bit of a flag. As you can see here, we have both the downtrend that it just broke out of, and then we have kind of this other area up here. But for all things considered, it just broke out of this flag / channel, whatever you want to call it. And we did have that nice retest on the hourly over here and then continuation up. So far, as long as it remains above this flag, it will continue into the 240s. That's the expected target in this case, at least the measured move of this. You could sometimes gauge that based on the flag pole, or at least where the flag pole started to one of the initial tops. So that's a 13% move here. If you were to look at a breakout, if this was the actual breakout, then you could extrapolate that a lot higher and it would go all the way up into the 250s to make a same move, high 250s that is. So that's assuming the flag pole gives us a general idea of how far the breakout could go. But even then, even if it's not a 13% move, even half of that is still going to be very profitable to those whales that added those calls that I just showed you over here. So wanted to mention that. Now going back to the flow, if you have watched to this point in the video, here's a discount code that you can use. You could try Cheddar Flow out for 7 days. If you don't like it, then you can cancel beforehand. But if you do like it, you'll get a 15% off discount for using this code for watching our videos. So check that out. Click the link in the description to do that. And now without further ado, let's go look at that print that we have not seen since 2022. And it actually is on the VIX. So as you can see here, $12 million print, 133,452 contracts were bought. And these aren't just any contracts. These are out the money for the October 22nd expiration. So we have not seen a singular print of this magnitude, not just premium, not just the size of the print as well, but also how far out the money it is. 31 is very far out the money. And this is a substantial order going into a period where we know there typically is bearish seasonality, and that's between September and October. So if we go into order details on this print, we can see here that most of these were executed above the ask during the day. And this is a massive increase in the volume relative to the open interest. So these were bought to open. This is a very directional. Now, do we know the exact intention of this whale? It's possible this is a hedge for a large institution going into that seasonally bearish time period, or it could be a volatility directional bet. Could be either of those. The bottom line of this is it's super unusual to see that. At least provides us with a cautionary tale going into that bearish seasonality period, like I mentioned before, because you do not see this print, guys, very often. Like I said, since 2022, you haven't seen something of such magnitude on the VIX. So I want to go over to the chart of the S&P 500, and then I'll also show you VIX's chart to give us a general understanding of what could happen here. So first off, S&P 500, we still have an applicable inverse head and shoulder here. So this is kind of what we've been watching now. If you've been watching these videos past couple of weeks, we do have this inverse head and shoulder. It was able to reclaim the range that it broke down from. Remember this range that started back here, we broke down below it and then it reclaimed it. So that's a bullish sign, at least. Inverse head and shoulder is also bullish. However, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we did have a lot of red in the tech sector, specifically the Mag 7 on Friday, and we did see a dump as a result here on the S&P 500, but it is still above the right shoulder of this inverse head and shoulder. So you'd expect, as long as it can bid over this area around 642, 641, maybe on a wick down, it should continue to go higher in the near term. And that's a key caveat here. Eventually, there will come a time where it maybe retest this either immediately this week. Things maybe start to get hectic right away on Tuesday after the Labor Day weekend. Or if we have a kind of a grind higher into the 650s, maybe as we head into September, which is typically bearish, like I mentioned before, we could see a retest of this zone. This 642.52 level is super important. And then we have also a 635 level from down here, this 635 roughly 46 up around this area, which is a dark pool print. If either of these are breached, or both, I guess in this case, we're going to have a lot more problems. It's going to fall a lot lower. So in the near term, this is still something that is kind of a bid opportunity because it's showing strength, but I can start to see some of the picture, kind of like what we're seeing with the back end of the flow and also that bearish seasonality, that this could roll over going into one of the weeks of September. So got to be a little bit more cautiously bullish as things go on. And until it breaks below some of these levels and maybe a retest down here, and we see if it's able to break through that as well, which are also two dark pool prints, two very substantial ones. If you remember from those videos, until these break to the downside, I'm not looking for shorts just yet. Got to wait for confirmation, especially when we are up so much in the market since that tariff fiasco back in March and December. And that must hold level did actually hold. And now it's up. We could check right here. Since the lows, it's up 34% in a year. Less than a year since then. So incredible move so far. Does not mean the train has to stop immediately. That's the thing I want to tell you guys. And even with that VIX print, they have time until it expires, almost 2 months of time until that print expires. So got to be careful in the short term. Don't want to get wiped out. There will be a short setup here. We need confirmation for it first. So wanted to mention that there. And then also, of course, want to mention the VIX because this has remained dormant since the tariff fiasco that I just mentioned back in April and March of this year. And it's a bit harder to do technical analysis on the VIX just because it isn't like an individual ticker. It doesn't follow the same mechanics, so to speak. However, there is a very clear downtrend right here that it's kind of held to. We had a fake breakout over here. And this is kind of why I say it's hard to do technical analysis, because typically if you see a daily candle break out of a downtrend on an individual name, you're typically going to see some more upside after. But in this case, was able to fall back down, but has been stuck in between here in this downtrend for a long time, ever since May, actually. So eventually, you'd expect this to break out because previous ones we have seen break out before. And really that 31 strike, we haven't seen since back during this period. We've only seen about a 30, a couple, like 2, not even 3 times since all the way back around this time period in August of 2024. We had that first spike. And before that, it had been a very long time since we'd seen 30, all the way back to March of 2023, if you remember the whole SVB crisis. So definitely a print we want to keep on our radar, see if there's more of those, because that would be a telltale sign that something is coming. We've seen in the past when VIX order flow starts to really pick up in an aggressive fashion that normally soon after you do see a spike. We saw that in February. If you remember, end of February of this year, actually, there was a huge spike and then that ended up being an all-time high top before we had some of the tariff fears. So it is something to watch. So far, it's a singular print, although very big print that is. And if we continue to see more of those, it is going to be more worrisome, probably looking at an impending rollover. But for now, the technicals at least remain relatively strong in the near term, at least. And the final thing I want to mention over here is NVIDIA. And I'm going to go to the flow first. There was a whopping $562.4 million worth of bullish premium last week on NVIDIA. And some of this is due to earnings because we see afterwards there was a lot of activity the day after earnings, which is not uncommon. You're going to see an uptick in volume because of that, but this is still an insane number. Like Tesla was 305 million, and that's still a pretty decent number for the week, all things considered. So a lot of activity, bullish activity that is on NVIDIA. And if you look over at X here, you can see that there were a couple unusual prints on this name. First off, there was about a $2 million one over here for NVIDIA, this $2.7 million. And then if we scroll up, and that was for put, by the way, this is a put seller, so kind of counteracts what we saw before. Their goal was to collect a premium on these contracts and actually was a decent volume spike relative to the open interest. And then if we scroll up just a little bit more here, you can see intraday, almost $100 million worth of bullish premium on NVIDIA. And this was about lunchtime at the time that they posted this, which is ridiculous. You don't see that very often. So tons of activity there. And then going back to the flow, if we go to some of these individual prints, you can just look at Friday, for example. We can see here $1.1 million for this about at the money call print. And this has short-dated expiration, actually expires at the end of this upcoming week. And then if we scroll down here, a couple other interesting prints as well. For example, this massive $2.9 million 195 strike. So out the money, but very far dated expiration on this one, expires in June of 2027. So this has a lot of premium on it, but this is something that is very far dated. We saw a lot of those, by the way, throughout the day. There's a couple other ones over here for 150 strike. You can see a mix of them. And we've seen this more so after earnings pickup, where kind of institutions like the long-term outlook based on the earnings report, based on their systems. So in this case, we'd buy those call leaps. So bottom line, a lot of interesting flow on NVIDIA. Final thing I'll show you is its chart. You can see here we did have that dump on Friday, like I mentioned before, but still it is so high up from where it was earlier this year, let alone its entire rally that we've seen since 2022 lows. So as long as it continues to stay above its breakout area over here from a macro perspective, we're talking about 150 for previous supply zone, now demand zone, it's going to continue to go up in the near term. Now it's pretty far from that level, all things considered. So even if it saw a pullback, you're looking at about a 14% pullback just to get back to that level, which would seem like the end of the world to people. But as long as it does remain above this, it will continue to bid. As for up here, I don't really have a read personally, just because it could either go and break down from this range that it's in. You can see kind of a range forming over here, rough range I'll give you guys here in the video, but kind of a rough range between 183, 174. Could this head to break down from that? If so, you're looking at possibly a retest of that 150 at some point during September/October. Otherwise, if it decides to break out, it just keeps chugging along to the upside. So regardless, as always, appreciate you guys watching this video. I'll see you next time.